We're back with Steve Erdmann, and Steve has helped the museum gather together an exhibit, which we will be speaking about later in this segment. But right now, Steve, I'd like to go back maybe perhaps before Marie Antoinette. And how far back does it go that human beings wore feathers?
We have documentation that feathers were used as status symbols back at least 3,000 years. I mean, this begins with the pharaohs in Egypt that had fans. You know, I mean, there are hieroglyphs with fans like this. The Roman armies, feathers were used in their helmets to indicate status and rank of certain officers. So there's a long history throughout the world of feathers being used like this.
And then through the ages, it just continued, and has it always been there?
It's always been there that we know of, yes.
Okay, so Marie Antoinette wasn't really the first, but when it comes to fashion, or maybe the middle class, or...
Well, fashion.
Fashion.
I mean, we're primarily talking about status symbols before then, but just being fashionable to wear hats with plumage. It really starts with Marie Antoinette.
Right, in that period of history.
Right.
Where are we today with laws and protecting Florida's natural wildlife?
Florida has, like all states at this point, laws against killing these types of birds and using their feathers. I mean, here in Palm Beach County and under Florida law, if you kill a snowy egret, for example, there's a fine and potential jail time. To possess it has jail and a fine. To sell the feathers has jail time and a fine. So if you kill it, hold on to it, and sell it, you're probably looking at something like a fine of $1,500 and up to a year in jail.
Wow. And what about anything such as a feather farm?
Well, keep in mind that we're only talking about certain types of non-game birds that come under this classification. So there are other birds, turkeys, for example, are ranched. And using turkey, there's nothing illegal about using turkey feathers. Ostrich feathers. And ostrich feathers, after many of these laws first came into effect, become very popular. I mean, these are not game birds like this, and they're not birds that fall into these kind of categories. They're farmed, basically. Chicken feathers today are used often. You can buy bags of chicken feathers at a shop that sells things for crafts.
And is it illegal to have an eagle feather?
Yes.
That is illegal?
Yes, and it's protected. There are certain Indian tribes in the United States that there are provisions in the laws where certain tribes, and Hopi Indians in Arizona are an example, where these are used in religious ceremonies, but they're come under strict guidance from the federal government. They're allowed to take only a certain number per year and done under surveillance, basically.
Steve, let's talk about the exhibit here at the museum. What can people expect if they come to see the exhibit?
What they can expect is to see a journey through this period. I mean, beginning with photographs and information on these early times of status, like the pharaohs of Egypt, and then taking a look at the early millinery industry. And one of the things that we have on exhibit are 3 hats from this period. Keep in mind that these hats are now over 100 years old, and feathers are one of those materials that deteriorate badly. So these were hats that were donated to the Western Reserve Historical Society in Ohio. That's where we borrowed these hats from. In the early 1930s, when they were still not too old, but have been kept in the dark because feathers deteriorate badly from light. There are not many hats like this that are still in museum collections today. We have 3 shotguns on display that were owned by someone's grandfather, and they were involved in bloom hunting at the time. For gun collectors, these are very interesting pieces, and one in particular which was made in Germany. They called them German garden guns. It's a shotgun, but it has two different bores, 6 millimeter and 9 millimeter. Depending on how close you were to a rookery and what you wanted the scatter to be, and whether the birds were taking off, you could use either trigger. These are interesting pieces, if nothing else, for gun collectors. You would think there might be more taxidermy birds like this around, but there aren't. And few places actually do this anymore except on contract for museum displays. Primarily today, sculptures are made, and that's usually what you see exhibited. We have several taxidermied shorebirds from this period that we borrowed from the Science Museum here in West Palm Beach. We had a snowy egret sculpted by a company in Pompano Beach so that it's hanging from the sky in flight. And it is an interesting piece in itself. We have a video playing that shows you all the different birds in the area and that were indigenous here. You know, one of the ones that didn't make it at all through this period was the Carolina parakeet, which are completely extinct at this point. And they died off during this period of time because their plumage was so bright colored that people wanted these.
And what do they look like?
They're very bright yellows and oranges. You know, it's a very, almost like you would think of a parrot is what they look like. We do have a taxidermied version of one of these on display in the permanent galleries of the museum. That was donated to us by Carlin White from Jupiter. His family, his grandparents had people from the Smithsonian here back in the turn of the last century, 1900, that were capturing these birds for specimens, and a group of these people stayed with Carlin White's grandparents. And, you know, in reciprocity, in return for the favor of staying in their house while they were on an expedition here, they presented the family with this bird that Carlin later gave us.
And the museum is located in the hours that the exhibit is open?
The museum galleries are open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning till 5 p.m. in the afternoon, in the 1916 courthouse in downtown West Palm Beach. It's free. There is no admission charge to visit the museum.
It's a wonderful place to bring young people to, because it's thought that we have little or no history here in Palm Beach County and South Florida, when in fact we have a very rich history.
We have a very rich history here.
And just briefly, you described President Roosevelt's departure from Tampa to Havana, and something that he saw there that stayed with him.
Right.
I think that would stay with me too.
Yes.
Would you tell our audience about that?
Yes. You know, many people know about Theodore Roosevelt leaving from Tampa for Cuba. This is during the Spanish-American War period, 1896. And he led the Rough Riders there. While he was staying in Tampa, there were large piles of bird carcasses near the port of Tampa, and these were primarily blue herons. And in his diaries, Theodore Roosevelt described these piles as being up to 20 yards high of just rotting bird carcasses that had been stripped of plumage. And that image haunted him for the next 10 years until actually he had the opportunity to do something about it. It was brought to his attention another pelican island, which is in the Indian River Lagoon across from the town of Sebastian today, where the same sort of rookery hunt down was occurring, and that rookery was being wiped out. And he met with Frank Chapman, who was the ornithologist I mentioned from the American Museum of Natural History. What could we do about this? And he asked, is there any law that would prevent me from declaring this a wildlife refuge. And apparently there wasn't, and there wasn't. And he said, I so declare it, and declared the first national wildlife refuge in the country.
And that was where?
Pelican Island, which is in the...
Up near Sebastian?
Up near Sebastian.
The very first.
The very first.
And then what came after that?
During his presidency, he declared another 51 refuges like this around the state of Florida. He also declared refuges on the coast of Louisiana and the Oregon coastline too. During his presidency, he declared 234 million acres of the United States as either wildlife refuges or national forests or national parks. So by the time he left his presidency, besides just areas that were protected, there was an environment and where rookeries could exist and avian life could continue.
Mm-hmm. Do you see in the present movement now to preserve, to protect, do you see good things happening?
Yes, I do. And I think that, you know, looking back at that early period of conservation, you can see a straight line that goes all the way through today, where things that happened like the BP oil spill in the Gulf bring people to attention immediately. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know that if you look back in time 100 years, you see the same kind of reaction taking place. The public has become much more acutely aware of environmental degradation like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you for everything you do. I would like to ask you to come down to our museum and see this exhibit, along with many other exhibits that are in the museum. It's a very interesting place to bring young people, and adults enjoy it too. I'd also like to remind you that Inside History is here to remind you that it's very easy to destroy. It's very easy to tear down, but once it's gone forever. And we here at Inside History would like to promote Palm Beach County's history, South Florida's history, and the state of Florida's history, because we have a very rich one. We've been with Steve Erdmann, and Steve, I would like to thank you for being here today. You have really enlightened us so much about a period of history that we all need to know about. Get involved. I'm Bob Carter. Thank you.